Yeah, we're talking about him. I'm legally obligated to touch myself anytime that I say Andy Serkis.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. My name's Tyler Hunt, and I am here with my co-host, as always, Pat Kuhn. How's it going, dude?
It's been going pretty well. I think it's kind of funny that we've been talking about your personal life and you switching jobs and moving and all that stuff and how it's been really, really crazy lately for you. And it seems like you're finally starting to settle down, and shit's been really crazy for me the last couple of weeks. We were talking a little bit before we started recording, but I've basically been at the same job for like 4 years, and I've been pretty content with it. It's a decent job. I get paid pretty good money, and it allows me to do a lot of the extra stuff that I do, stand up, podcast, YouTube, and stuff. Like, I have a lot of downtime at my job to be able to do all of those things. But recently I've been kind of considering, and I think a lot of it has to do with you moving on and getting a better job. I'm like, maybe I should start looking myself. And it just kind of happened where I got basically 2 interviews at the same time. I may or may not have a job offer on Tuesday, and I have another one that I'm kind of waiting to hear back from. So it's been kind of crazy. So I've been having conversations with people, kind of getting their advice, how I'm supposed to play this, because this one job I really want and the other one I could give or take. It's been a weird situation for me the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked about it a little bit behind the scenes, but, you know, anytime you have interviews, it's kind of stressful. So, you've had a few in the last couple of weeks, and I know how that goes. It adds a lot of extra to life and all of those good things.
Yeah, it's so weird because I had I had applied for this one job like a month ago, and I honestly forgotten about it. Like, I was just kind of browsing, and it sounded interesting, and it sounded like a step up for me. And so I applied to it, didn't really think anything of it because I didn't hear back from them within like a week, and I just kind of moved on with my life. And then I was out of the blue kind of called by one of my former supervisors, and this other position opened up in the company that I actually work for, and it would be a little bit of a pay bump. So he basically talked me into applying, and I got an interview. And then the HR lady for that job called me, and she was kind of weird. She didn't really say that I was offered the job, but I kind of am, and it's just really weird. But then I ended up having a phone interview, which is kind of like the first step with this other company that I had applied for like a month ago. And it's really stressful, and I just don't know how I want to play it, because the other job with the other company is the one that I really want. And it's really weird. And I haven't been in that situation in a while. So and I wouldn't say brand new, but it's just kind of weird.
Well, I mean, I don't have all of life's answers or anything, but the one thing that I can confirm for you is that HR people are weird. So, I can attest to that.
For sure. But I think she was extra weird, because it was just the way she explained it was I moved on to the next step, she said I was selected for the next step to meet with her. Like it was some kind of privilege.
Dude, this sounds like you're going to be like going through the superhero, gauntlet. Like you're going to be Steve Rogers or something, getting injected with serum, and you're going to get superhero powers.
I was just kind of hoping that I would like have some Rocky montage. I thought that would be kind of fun. Just like a training montage of me going through all these interviews. But
yeah, man, what's the next
I think
step?
She's probably just going to offer me the job.
That'd be a big letdown, because I would really hope that the next step is something a lot more exciting.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so if this is your first episode, we kind of just check in with each other. We like to just kind of just talk about whatever we're into. So what are you into this week?
I want to talk about Bob's Burgers. It's fall season, so all of these TV shows we love are are coming back on the air. I talked about Brooklyn Nine-Nine, I think last episode, and Bob's Burgers is another show that I love to death and was very excited to see coming back on the air. So, it's starting its 8th season, which is really hard for me to believe that it's already in its 8th season, but it's been really cool to see this show grow in popularity over the years. And, you know, it has a movie coming out, and I think it's either 2020 or 2021. So this little weird show that was used as a placeholder between The Simpsons and Futurama has really found its fan base and found its footing. And it's really cool to see that. So, so far, season 8 is only 3 episodes in. By the time this podcast releases, the 4th episode will have aired Sunday night, but we are recording this before that episode comes out. But so far, I'd say season 8's off to a pretty good start. The annual Halloween episode was the last episode, and that was always good. The Halloween episodes are great, but the standout to me was episode 2 of the season, which is called The Silence of the Louise, which is a fun episode. It sees, Louise is trying, like, kind of acting as a detective. She's trying to discover or find out who destroyed Mr. Franz's dolls that he keeps in his office, because there was a promised, water park field trip that has been canceled until they find the culprit of who destroyed this teacher's dolls. And so what she ends up having to do is she wants to get inside the mind of a weirdo that would do such a thing to these random little dolls. So she talks to a character named Millie that's popped up for a few times over the last 8 years, who is homesick. Millie's kind of a notoriously a weird character, that's kind of obsessed with Louise. So she goes and she wants to get inside her mind to kind of track the culprit's train of thought. So Millie, of course, expects something in return, which is Louise's friendship, and Louise is forced to do things with her. And overall, it's just like a really clever and hilarious episode that's kind of a play on Silence of the Lambs, which I thought was hilarious. I also, besides just that episode being amazing, I do want to talk about the first episode of this season. This episode kind of took a really creative approach, and honestly, I wasn't very fond of it. What they did was each segment of the episode 1 was animated by different fans with their fan art. And while that sounds like a really cool concept, and it sounds like a really awesome move by a show that's really in touch with their fan base, it wasn't very great for a storytelling, from a storytelling concept. So it was really hard to follow and really muddled because the animation was switching so often. But, you know, that experiment aside, this season's off to a really cool start, and it's still fresh and it's taking chances, which is awesome. So I'm happy to see again that this show has found its footing over the years and it's found its fan base over the years, and it looks like it's going to be around for a while.
Yeah, that first episode sounds kind of weird. It seems like something that would be a really fun idea, but it doesn't sound like it was executed very well, just because it seems like it'd be really cool for the person that got to do the fan art. But then everybody else that's watching, just like you, would be like, what the hell am I watching here?
Like you just,
so it just feels like it would be special for that person or the many people that got to do it, but it wouldn't necessarily make for the best episode.
It just completely takes away from the dialogue. Like you're not focusing on what the characters are saying. You're just focusing on the artwork. So I couldn't even tell you what that episode was about, to be honest, because it was such a weird watch. But, I mean, I appreciate what they were going for. It just, for me, it didn't land.
For sure. It sounds pretty weird, but I really like that show. It's one of the shows that you actually got me into, like Rick and Morty. I don't know what it is about adult cartoons that you're a lot more gung-ho into, and then you kind of just have to pull me in reluctantly. But I really like that show quite a lot. I haven't caught up with the most recent season, but I definitely plan on doing so.
Yeah. Awesome, man. So what are you into?
Well, I am into Stranger Things Season 2. It seems like it's been forever since we recorded, just because we recorded so early in the week last episode. And this was released right after we recorded. I think we recorded on Thursday, and of course this was released on Friday. And I had taken the day off that Friday and Saturday. I worked a weird Tuesday through Saturday schedule. And really I took Friday off to watch Stranger Things, and then I just took Saturday off just because I didn't want to have to go back into work. So I kind of started my rewatch of season 1 a couple of days beforehand. So I started a couple episodes on Wednesday, a couple on Thursday, and I kind of just finished my rewatch of season 1 on Friday. And then I kind of waited for my wife to get home anxiously, and she finally did come home, and we binged the entire almost said first season, but we binged the entire second season. We didn't end up going to bed until like 2:00 that morning, because we were just so into it. I kind of tricked her also into watching the entire season that first go, because I was just, we got to like the episode 6 and I was like, oh, just one more. And she's like, okay. And then by the time we got to the last episode, I was just like, come on, we're right here. Let's just finish it out. So we ended up staying up until like 2:00 in the morning, which for me is not that big of a deal, but for her, it's a pretty big deal. She usually goes to bed about 9:30, 10 o'clock. So we ended up watching it, that night. And then just cause the weekend was kind of a lazy weekend for me, I ended up watching it 2 more times from start to finish. So I've actually seen the second season of Stranger Things 3 times.
Holy shit,
from start to finish. Yeah. So, I mean, that sounds crazy, but it was just because it was a super lazy weekend, and it was also my weekend to edit. So one of those watches was just me editing that episode of the podcast. So that has a lot to do with it as well. Obviously, I've seen it 3 times. So, I mean, you can infer that I loved it, which I did. I just think that ultimately the first season, I think, is a stronger story and a stronger season. But the fact that the second season even comes close to it, I think, is a testament to how good it is, because I really, really love that season, the first season, and the fact that the second season even comes close to it is just phenomenal. I really appreciate how, I mean, there's a ton to love about this show, but one of the things that really kind of caught me off guard, I didn't really expect it, was how well that they were able to incorporate Will into the group. I was really, really nervous because obviously he's not really in the first season that much. And what's great about the first season for me is the group dynamic. And I was afraid that he was going to kind of throw that off, but they were able to kind of find a way to bring him into the group. He's definitely a bigger part of the group than he was in season 1, but they also found a way to also not include him in the group. And I'm trying to be vague to avoid spoilers, but it reminded me a lot of, and I know this is going to be a weird association, but kind of like the first 2 Hangover movies, where those movies, they had a really great concept in the first movie, and then they basically just made the exact same story in the second movie, where Stranger Things had a great concept in the first season, but then they kind of used some of that, but changed it. And I think that's what really great movies and really great shows do, is they give you what you want, but they also change the dynamic a little bit. And I think that definitely worked, to its advantage in the second season. That being said, they did a lot of that. They basically gave you what you love in the first season, but they gave you enough, they changed enough to make it interesting. It wasn't just like a carbon copy of the first season, which I appreciate. There was different relationships, like most notably Steve and Dustin. I thought that was a really interesting new dynamic that they brought to the show, because they don't really spend any time together in the first season, and they become pretty big buddies in the second season. So they didn't really rest on what they did great in the first season. They definitely were willing to take some chances, some of which I didn't really like that much. They introduced some new characters, which I thought were interesting, most notably Billy and Max. I think they're definitely interesting, especially Billy. I think that Billy has some of the same characteristics, some of the same arc that we see with Steve in the first season. I think that at first you kind of assume that Steve in the first season is going to be that stereotypical 80s bully, and they give him a little bit more to work with as the season goes on. And I think they don't quite do the exact same arc with Billy, but I think you're supposed to hate him a little bit more in the second season than you hated Steve in the first season. They definitely give Steve more redeeming qualities in the first season, but they give you enough empathy for Billy at least a little bit in the second season. That I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic. I'm definitely interested to see how that plays out in season 3. The acting was really, really good. I was especially impressed with Noah Snap, which I doubt that that's how you pronounce his last name. But he plays Will. Obviously, given that the fact that his character was barely in the first season, he's definitely asked to do more in this season than he was in the first season. And for the most part, I think he was up for the challenge. I will say, the one kind of weak link in that is the interrogation scene. For me, was a little over the top at certain parts, but for a child actor, I think he was really, really good. Of course, I love David Harbour as Hopper. I think he just kills it as that character, but also because that character is just such a badass that he plays it so well. Not a huge Winona Ryder fan. She's definitely, as far as the cast is concerned, she's definitely probably, I mean, for sure the most well-known actor in this show, and she is the weak link, I think, in the cast, which is weird. She overplays it a lot in season 1. She's not as asked to do as much in season 2, which is good, but it's very distracting. I feel like I'm just watching her. I'm not watching her character, which is definitely distracting. Unfortunately, not everything was perfect in the second season. I think that 11's arc was definitely the weakest part of season 2, and I'm not the only one that thinks that. A lot of people are a little bit angry about that particular aspect of season 2. I am not angry about it. I understand what they were trying to do by developing our backstory and kind of expanding the universe outside of Hawkins. I just don't care. Like, I don't care about that aspect of it. The show for me has always been the party and Hawkins. And of course, 11 is a big part of that, especially in the first season. But I really don't care if there's more people like her outside of Hawkins. And that episode 7, where it's basically just 11's episode, and she kind of goes off and does her own thing. The second and third time I watched it, I just went ahead and skipped it. Because I just don't care. I really just, if it didn't feel like an episode of Stranger Things. So the second season is definitely not perfect. Like I said, I understand what they were trying to do. And honestly, the show itself has a bit of an issue with 11 because they've made her so powerful that in season 2, if she had been with the group the entire time, there wouldn't have been any danger. She would have just stopped everything that came at them, and the show would have been over. So I get that they had that hurdle to go over, but that's something that they're going to have to deal with every season if they keep putting out shitty episodes where 11 kind of goes on her field trips. That's going to be definitely a kind of a black mark on this show. But yeah, I really, really dug this season. Like I said, I think ultimately season 1 is a better story and a tighter story. But season 2 is really, really good. I like the fact that they changed a little bit here and there. They took some chances, and I love that last episode. The last 20 minutes is just cute as hell.
Yeah, so I watched this show this week and finished it this morning, actually. Even
for the third time, of course.
No, for the first time, because I had to move, so I was a little late to the party with this show. But I don't know. You made a lot of points in your kind of recap there, and it's going to be hard to kind of go back through and say what I thought of all of those. But I mean, in general, I really dug Stranger Things season 2, and I've seen a lot of the hate coming out for this season, and maybe hate is a strong word, but I think most people seem to agree that it's not anywhere near season 1, and I don't know that that's fair because there were no expectations with season 1. It just kind of came out of nowhere. So this show had everything against it in continuing that story, and I think that they did a really good job, and everybody was great the second time around, and like you said, 8 out of 9 episodes were really great. I also really disliked the episode that focuses on 11 in Chicago, but for the most part, I thought it was really good. I don't know that I'll ever watch it 2 or 3 more times like your crazy ass did, but yeah, it's good, and it set up season 3, and I'm excited for season 3 and to see the stories of these characters continue.
For sure, and I probably won't watch it again until third season comes out. I'll probably just do another rewatch of the first and second season, but I've kind of thrown in the towel. I'm done with season 2 for a little bit, but every once in a while I'll kind of make that joke to my wife. I'll be like, "Oh, so you want to watch season 2 of Stranger Things again?" She's like, Just stop watching that show." But yeah, I'm a little obsessed, but I think it is a really, really solid season of television. I'm really loving Stranger Things, obviously, and I think that if it continues, and I'm getting ahead of myself, of course, but if it has 2 or 3 more good seasons ahead of it, I mean, it could definitely creep up into that favorite of all time type of show, because I'm really loving it so far.
Yeah, man, that's awesome.
All right, so let's move on right on to comics. What'd you read this week?
So I read a new Image comic this week called Gravediggers Union #1. This comic is written by Wes Craig, who's a co-writer on the comic Deadly Class, which is also put out by Image. And it's drawn by an artist named Toby Cypress, who I am not as familiar with. But this comic, it's a new comic. It's a #1, and it's like, so stop me if you've heard this before. It's a book that's about monsters, vampires, zombies, etc., living among us, and they're kind of starting to attack humans at increasing rates. So obviously that's kind of a story that we've heard before, or at least I've heard before, or I've read before, or seen in movies and TV before. But what this book does is it presents this group that's funded by the government called the Gravediggers Union, whose purpose is to stop these acts from happening. So to stop these supernatural creatures from attacking humans. So in a world that we live in that is saturated with comics like this, I feel like a book has to be incredibly original and creative to earn my money. And the thing with this comic is that it's one of those #1s where you don't learn enough in the first issue to know whether or not it's going to be that. And I get that you can't completely blow your load with issue 1, but I found this story somewhat hard to follow given how little we're introduced to this universe. Sure, it makes guessing where the story and future issues, where it's headed, really hard to do, and it keeps you kind of on the edge of your seat. But at the end of the day, I need to fall in love with a story in issue 1 to keep reading, and that really wasn't there for me with this book. I think the artwork's really great, especially when it comes to like the character design and colors that they use for the undead. But at the end of the day, I read it and I put it down, and it was when I was just kind of reflecting on it, it was like there wasn't anything given to me to, keep me on the hook with this book. So there's just too much out there to read and discover right now for me to stick with this comic, because you've really got to capture your audience with a strong first issue. And if the first issue of this book didn't blow me away, I doubt that issue, 5, 6, or 7 is going to do that down the road. So for me, I just don't know that it's going to be worth my time and money.
Yeah, it seems like with a genre that's super saturated like that one that you just described, you have to do something extraordinary to kind of push yourself away from the pack. And it doesn't sound like this comic did that.
Nope, exactly. And that was a bummer, because I thought it could have been a cool concept. And maybe this concept does turn into something cool down the road as this run continues. But for me, I just don't have time to wait for that whenever there's a million other things that I read and that I need to get caught up on. So, not going to be for me. But, what'd you read this week?
I read a #1 as well, Deadman #1, which is written and drawn by Neil Adams, who is a longtime Batman writer who's done previous work with Deadman before. I don't know a ton about Deadman. I figured I would give it a shot because it's Adams and he's a well-known comic creator, and it's a #1. I figured it was going to be a nice chance to kind of expand my comic book horizons a little bit. Unfortunately, I don't think that this book was created for me. Even though it is a #1, it's not a new story. It picks up where the last book left off. And so, therefore, I'm already at a disadvantage because I don't know the character very well. I know of the character, but I don't know the character very well. And I'm picking up with a story that I hadn't read yet. I actually had to read this story twice because I read it for the first time, and I honestly was thinking about picking a different comic to talk about because I couldn't even explain it. Like, I had no idea what was happening. It felt like a fever dream because it just bounced from one thing to another, and I had no idea what was happening. And so I kind of sat down and I looked some stuff up about the character and kind of read some stuff about the last story that it follows. And then I read it again, and I understand it a little bit more, but it's still really confusing. And I kind of started thinking about it, and I was like, you know what? Maybe it's not me. At a certain point, we read a ton of comics. And at a certain point, if I read something twice, and I've done a little bit of research about the book, and I still can't understand the story, maybe it's just a confusing fucking story, and maybe nobody was gonna get it. Like, I really have a hard time thinking that even if you had read the first story, and even if you knew a lot about the character, I still think this would be a confusing story. It's very dialogue heavy, and there's also a lot of action. So it's like you get a ton of dialogue, but it's kind of clunky and confusing, and then all of a sudden there's a ton of action, and it just kind of jumps back and forth between heavy dialogue and heavy action. It's just really, really hard to follow. There's a ton of different plot lines that aren't really explained or explored, and maybe, like I said, I didn't read the first story, so maybe I'm definitely missing something. But like I said, I still think that even if you're familiar with the character, you'd be confused. Because I just think it's a poorly written story. Neil Adams is kind of an OG comic artist, and as far as the art is concerned, you can definitely tell that he has that older style to him. It felt like I was watching an older comic book, like I was reading an older comic book, which is not necessarily bad. It's just that you definitely felt like his artwork is a little outdated. So, not the best artwork and a really confusing, convoluted story. So I would definitely skip it.
Yeah, this was actually on my list of things to buy this week, and I'm excited to say that since I've moved up here, I've found my new comic book shop, and they had a lot of the stuff that I was missing over the last couple of weeks, but they had sold out of this, so I didn't end up picking it up. And I don't think that I'm going to go back and pick it up now because of what you said about it. I knew that it was kind of more of a continuation of a previous story that he had done, but it sounds like maybe it would be just a little too complicated to jump in at this point, even though the character of Deadman is a character that intrigues me a little bit. So I think that I will pass on it, but that is a bummer hearing that it's a little too convoluted.
It does have a little bit of Batman in it, which I was kind of excited about because it is Neil Adams, and he's written a lot of good Batman stories in the past. So I was definitely intrigued by that, but it doesn't have enough Batman, and it's not a good enough story to carry it.
Yeah, man, that's a bummer.
All right, so what's nerd news this week?
All right, so just a few stories this week. I would do more, but I think that you kind of blew our load on our Facebook page with most of the nerd news stories that came out. So I only picked out a couple to talk about on the podcast because
I'm pretty good at blowing my load.
Yeah, dude, you've been a busy beaver on that fucking Facebook page, just posting shit left and right. So, I just picked out a couple things that we could talk about together. The first is probably the biggest story since we last spoke, which is that Zachary Levi's been cast as Shazam in the Shazam movie, or I guess it would technically be Captain Marvel, but I don't know that they have the rights to use that name anymore, so they'll probably refer to the character as Shazam. But either way, Zachary Levi is going to be playing the title role there that Billy Baxton transforms into when he says Shazam. So for me, I think that this is pretty decent casting, but that dude's got to bulk up quite a bit before they start shooting.
Yeah, for sure. It seemed kind of weird to me. Not that I'm super familiar with that character, really. I really kind of only know it from passing DC stories, but also just playing Injustice. So I don't know a ton about the character, but it seemed like it fit, but also his body type is definitely kind of confusing to me. It just seems like weird because he's not like a well-known actor.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he blew him away in the audition, then that's awesome that they're not just going for the big name, that they're going for something that or someone that they feel is better fit for the character.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to imagine, like, in future installments, his arch nemesis is Black Adam, who's going to be played by The Rock. And, you know, that guy's going to have to be super charismatic and super built to, you know, stand up to him in any kind of film. So it'd be interesting to see what the Shazam movie looks like when it comes around, especially with him as the star.
Did you ever watch Chuck?
I did not watch Chuck. Did you?
No, so this is not a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, but what was he in before Chuck? I want to say that there was something that he was in that I've seen.
That is the only thing that I know him from.
Really? And he's kind of been absent over the last few years too. I mean, I know he was one of the Warriors 3 in the Thor movies, which is kind of a tie to our review a little later, but I don't know what else he's been in. He was a voice in Tangled. He was the voice of Flynn Rider in Tangled, but besides that, not many live action roles that I can think of.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was so surprising that they cast him, because it just seemed like so out of the blue, because we haven't seen him do anything big like this in forever or ever, because I mean, he's not necessarily a well-known actor other than Chuck.
Yeah, man, I bet
so.
They got
It's
him
usually
on the cheap.
these roles usually go to somebody that is kind of in the spotlight right now, and he's not been in the spotlight for a while now.
Yeah, man. At this point, it's probably getting hard to find an actor that's not attached to a superhero property. So, maybe that's why.
For sure.
All right. So this next one, it's not really like a story, by any means, but I thought it was interesting and I kind of wanted to get your take on it. So obviously you're a huge Andy Serkis fan, and he kind of was jerking himself off a little bit in a recent interview talking about how, you know, he was the Mac Daddy of motion capture and film, starting with Gollum in Lord of the Rings. And the actor that played Jar Jar Binks, Ahmed Best, kind of tweeted something out saying, listen, I know everybody hates Jar Jar, but to completely disregard that motion capture performance in the 90s is bullshit. Which I kind of agree with. Like, you know, as much as we hate Jar Jar and we hate the Phantom Menace, like, that was pretty groundbreaking for the time. And because that character is so loathed, people forget about it being a big deal whenever that movie came out. So I kind of wanted to hear your take on it, given that, you know, you touch yourself when you think of Andy Serkis, and where you kind of fall
exclusively.
On the side.
Anytime I'm touching myself, I'm thinking about him. No, I
mean, you're touching yourself right now. I can see it.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about him. I'm legally obligated to touch myself anytime that I say Andy Serkis, but I almost said Andy Samberg right there. So, either or, really. But, yeah, I get his point. First of all, I wouldn't openly admit that I played Jar Jar Binks. Like, that was something that I would not remind people. But honestly, I'm going to take Andy Serkis' side no matter what. But he also started a company that does motion capture. Like, this guy did one performance. Andy Serkis has done multiple performances and has moved the technology ahead. This guy just did one shitty movie. Well, I guess he was in a couple of different movies, but yeah, I don't know. It's weird because I'm gonna take Andy Serkis' side no matter what. I get the guy's point, but I mean, you did one character, he's done several. Yeah, you were kind of the first one to do it.
And I think that was his point. He's not saying
that he was the first one to do it. He's just saying that the way that I interpret that quote is that he's moved the technology along. This guy was he was doing one character in a couple of movies, and he wants everybody to give him cred now.
I think Andy Serkis is just butthurt because nobody wants to cast him as a real character except for as a Claw in the Black Panther movies. Like, that's legitimately the only thing that he's a real person in. So nobody wants to cast his ugly mug in a movie, so he started this company where he can keep being Gollum, and now he thinks he's the Mac Daddy man, and he's not.
You better watch your mouth, because podcast is almost over.
Dude, I'm just trying to get you riled up.
Yeah, I mean, I literally was like sitting there gripping my armrest while you were saying that. I was like, God damn it, dude. You better shut your mouth. No, I don't know, man. I think, like I said, I don't know. I wouldn't remind people that you play Jar Jar Binks.
All right, man. The last one is something that I saw you posted about on Facebook, but I did want to bring it up. It is regarding the Amazon Lord of the Rings show. So it turns out that WB and the Tolkien estate are pretty close to coming to an agreement with Amazon to do a show based on Lord of the Rings. And I know you kind of put your thoughts out there on our Facebook. To me, it's kind of just like, why? I mean, I guess that, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about money, and that show would get Amazon subscribers and maybe get it closer to those Netflix or Hulu numbers that it probably wants to get to. But at the end of the day, I don't know what kind of stories you tell in Middle Earth that people are going to care about that weren't written by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's the same kind of thing, the same kind of fear, I guess, I have around Game of Thrones spinoffs, because yeah, sure, you can tell stories in that world, but at the end of the day, they're not going to have been written by George R.R. Martin, and I don't know what the audience is going to think about that in the long run. So it'd be interesting to see what kind of approach they take with it, but yeah, sounds like it's coming.
Yeah, I'm, like you said, I kind of put a short little thing out there on our Facebook page and a little bit less on Twitter, but I like the idea. I think that there's enough there. There's enough kind of side material in a lot of those books that they didn't cover in the movies or in the Hobbit, that there's enough mythology around Middle Earth that you could do something like that. I just feel like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. try to do the same thing with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that show's never going to be what we want it to be. We're never going to see Captain America or Thor or any of those big characters that we want to see in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's going to be the same thing. We're going to want to see all of these characters that we see in the movies, and there's just no way that we're ever going to see those. And so they're just going to be kind of in adjacent to all of those stories, and it just, I don't know. I'll watch it because I'm a sucker for anything Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, but it's never going to be what I want it to be.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those lame shows. It's like, oh, I heard about this wizard a couple towns over.
Exactly.
Or this ring or this hobbit. So, yeah, to me, I could do without that for sure.
For sure.
All right, man. You ready to move on?
Yeah, so at this point of each episode, we kind of have just a main topic. It changes from episode to episode, like we kind of teased a little bit earlier, and I'm sure you've seen in the show notes. We're going to be reviewing Thor Ragnarok, which, of course, is the third solo Thor film, and it is the 17th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was directed by Taika Waititi, which I feel like I nailed his name right there.
Yeah, man.
A little bit hesitant, but I feel like I nailed it. Of course, he's part of Flight of the Conchords. He did What We Do in the Shadows, among others.
Did you just say he was part of Flight of the Conchords?
Well, yeah, I meant like creatively. Okay. He directed some episodes.
All right. That can be taken two ways, man. You made it sound like he was in the band, and he's not.
Okay, I'm sorry. I should have specified he had a part in the show Flight of the Conchords. I'm glad that you felt the need to interrupt
me.
Dude,
I'm just saving us some hate mail.
I'm just saying, I let the fact that you said Stranger Things 2 when that episode happened in Chicago, when it happened in Pittsburgh. I'm just going.
The recap I read of that episode said it happened in Chicago. Are you sure it happened in Pittsburgh?
Well, the first part happens in Pittsburgh.
All right. Well, I'm talking about the second part then.
Okay, cool. So I let that go. Are we going to get back to Thor Ragnarok now?
I don't know. Let's see if you say any other dumb things, and then we'll
I can't make any promises. I say a lot of dumb things. But I felt pretty weird going into this film because it's the first Thor film that I was genuinely excited for. I'm always going to be excited for Marvel Cinematic Universe films, but the Thor films have been really, really disappointing. Honestly, I don't really like the character that much. he reminds me a lot of Superman. He's basically Marvel's Superman because he's so strong. I mean, why would you ever mess with him? I feel like the character has a lot of the same problems that I have with Superman. But there was two main reasons why I was really excited for this film, other than the fact that obviously it was part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was going to kind of be a Planet Hulk film, as close as we're ever going to, I think, get to a Planet Hulk film. And of course, Taika Waititi, which I think I did better the first time. I got a little in my head right there, but the fact that those two things were kind of the creative force behind this movie definitely got me excited, more excited than I think I'll ever be for a Thor movie, because I just, like I said, not really all that interested in the character.
Yeah, same things here for me. Like, Thor was kind of on its third strike with this movie, and I wouldn't have looked forward to it had it not been for the trailers we've seen and for the creative team involved. So I'm a huge fan of Taika Waititi and his brand of humor. So I was pretty pumped when this movie was coming out.
For sure. So the first segment in each of our reviews is just kind of a general overview. We try not to spoil anything, of course, and we just call it broad strokes. So what'd you feel about Thor Ragnarok?
I mean, I kind of referenced it a second ago, but ever since the teaser trailer for this movie came out, I think it was around the Super Bowl, you could tell it was going to be much different from the other Thor movies. I think whenever you and I talked about the trailers, we compared it to Guardians of the Galaxy. And for me, it turns out that this movie actually comes back funnier than those movies. And it makes sense when you look back. I mentioned being excited for it because of the creative team involved. And, when Taika Waititi was hired, it should have been like an immediate sign that this movie was going to have a huge humor element, but and it wasn't going to be in the same vein as the other Thor movies. And I'm excited to say that it definitely takes a different creative approach. And at the end of the day, this movie definitely exceeded my expectations, even though those expectations were higher than they've ever been for a Thor movie. It was charming, it was hilarious, and for me, it refreshed a stale franchise and a stale character. So my question is, when was the last time you can remember the third movie in a trilogy being the best? Because that's what we have here.
Well, let's be honest, they didn't really set the bar too high with the first two films. The Dark World, I can't even watch that movie. Like, I own it, and I usually have a rule. Like, if I'm gonna spend money on something, I'm gonna actually watch it. Like, I'm gonna watch that physical copy that I own before I put it in my collection. And it just sat there and sat there and sat there, and I just eventually just put it away because I was like, I don't want to put myself through this, but it's a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, so I bought it. The first one's not horrible, but it definitely is one of the weaker links in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But The Dark World is really, really bad. But to kind of move on to my broad strokes, it's very rare for me to go into a film and I'm saying, like, I need these three things or however many things to be in this film and for me to absolutely love it and actually get those things. And for me, I wanted it to be kind of a Thor-centric Planet Hulk movie, which we got. I wanted it to be funny, because obviously the creative team behind it, you would assume that it was funny, and we definitely got that. And then I kind of wanted them to get away from Thor's mythology, because that definitely slows down the first two movies. The best part of those movies for me is when Thor's away from Asgard and he's kind of on Earth and kind of doing his own thing, and we kind of get away from all the gods and all the mythology. And I think that we got that to a varying degree as well. So I was very, very happy. I'm going to talk about the Planet Hulk and the Thor's mythology stuff in the story segment of our review. So I'll kind of stay away from that. But the humor for me in this movie, like you said, is just fantastic. I mean, for that first scene, you get it immediately. And I'm just like, all right, here we go. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be really, really funny. The only thing that I will say about the humor is when the shit hits the fan in the third film, or not the third film, the third act. I kind of wish they toned down the humor just a tad bit. Like, they were basically at like 11 the entire film, and then when the third act hit, they kind of turned it down to 9, and I wanted them to be kind of 7 or 8. And that's kind of a tiny nitpick, but it did kind of bother me because I wanted it, when we got to that third act, I wanted it to be all action and kind of take itself a little bit more seriously than it had previously in the movie. But for the most part, really, really funny. Just a breath of fresh air to this franchise.
Cool, man. You ready to move on to story?
Yeah, so what do you think of the story?
I mean, I thought the story was really great for the most part. The first, I mean, you can kind of separate it into 3 different, like the 3 different acts kind of all serve a different purpose. So the first third of the movie ties up the loose ends from the previous 2 films. The middle part of the film is everything we've looked forward to from the trailers, the Planet Hulk stuff. And then the end, unfortunately for me, was your stereotypical superhero fight. I think it makes perfect sense with what they did in this movie with the story, and adding the Planet Hulk elements elevated this film and helped me find a new respect for the character of Thor. I think that the second act is where the movie definitely shines, while the first act, to me, tying up the loose ends from the first 2 Thor movies kind of seems muddled. And then I kind of mentioned it already, but the third act is again more the same of what we're used to in superhero movies leading up to a big boss fight. There were some parts of the movie that I will say, even though, like I said, I loved it, there were some parts of the story that felt forced or out of place. For me, the bit with Doctor Strange specifically in the first act that was hinted at in Doctor Strange, the film's, credit part. I thought that felt completely out of place. And then there were a few other beats throughout the rest of the movie that I'm not going to spoil that I thought just kind of felt crammed in. All of these parts, though, all of these things that I'm mentioning that I didn't like about the story were easily forgivable, though, for me, because when you take into account the charm and the wit of everything that takes place on screen, you just kind of get encapsulated by it, and you fall in love with these characters all over again and the story they're telling on the screen. So for me, overall, a very enjoyable story that pushes the characters of Thor and all of the characters that we've seen in Thor, as well as the new characters, forward. And it also pushes the Marvel Cinematic Universe forward as well, which all of these movies have to do. So at the end of the day, while I do have a few gripes here and there, the story for me was pretty great.
Yeah, I think I agree with most of what you said. I will disagree a little bit with the Doctor Strange stuff. I think sometimes the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff in these movies are kind of heavy-handed. I don't think the Doctor Strange stuff was that bad. I think that it's needed in this movie to kind of get them where they needed to go. And it's not like he creeps back up. Like, it's not like something that they continually hit on throughout the movie. It's just, you needed something to kind of jumpstart the movie. And I thought that was kind of a cool little thing that they did.
Cool, man. So what do you think overall about the story, though?
I think this story is absolutely what solo Thor films need. Because I mentioned this a little bit in broad strokes, I don't give a shit about the Thor mythology. So for me, he's always going to need help from other characters, like Hulk in this particular film. But in future films, I think he's going to need help from other characters because I don't care about the Thor aspect of these Thor movies, which is kind of strange. But I thought the Planet Hulk stuff was amazing. I love the animated film, but I'm not like super familiar with the comic book. I read a little bit about it, but it went on for years, so I'm definitely not a historian of Planet Hulk by any means. That being said, I really loved how they didn't linger in the Planet Hulk stuff, because it's not a Hulk movie, it's a Thor movie. You do need to borrow some stuff, like I said, because I don't give a shit about Thor mythology, but I think that they did enough to make it fun, but they didn't linger in it. It didn't feel forced. It didn't spend like there there wasn't too much of Hulk in this movie. I love the fact that they didn't over-explain the Hulk stuff. They didn't get into his backstory about how he got there and what happened with him. Like, it was simple to the point and they moved on. And so I thought that was definitely well played. I definitely would have thought, I don't care. Like, just move on. So I liked the fact that they were just kind of simple to the point with the Hulk stuff. Like I said, the Thor mythology stuff was kind of boring, but it was used sparingly, which I obviously think is good because it really sucked the life out of the first two films. And the best part of the first two films are when Thor isn't on Asgard. And that is true with this film as well. The Planet Hulk stuff and the stuff that isn't the Thor mythology is definitely the best part of this movie. I really just kind of wanted to see more Thor and Hulk. I didn't really care about much of what was else that was happening. So, I kind of checked out sometimes when we were seeing the stuff that was happening at Asgard. I just, like I said, I can't stress that enough that I just don't really care about that. And I think, and we're going to get to the performances in a little bit, but I think that has a little bit to do with Cate Blanchett's performance. I wasn't a huge fan of it, even though she's a really talented actress. And unfortunately, Idris Elba, I was really looking forward to his character finally doing something. Like, we don't get much of his character in the first two films, and I was really looking forward to him actually doing something in this film. And they kind of tease that he's going to, and he does do a lot as far as the story is concerned, but you don't actually get to see much of that. And I kind of wish we got to see a little bit more of him being a badass. But for me, I think this is the closest that we're ever going to get to that perfect Thor movie, because I'm just not a fan of the character. So I think that this is about as best as you can ask for one of these movies.
Cool. So I'm excited to get into the performances because it sounds like you and I may have differing opinions here.
All right, cool.
So for me, I thought that everybody that came back from previous movies were pretty much on point. They know their characters. Like, Tom Hiddleston's not going to come into this movie and fuck up Loki. Chris Hemsworth adds an extra layer to Thor with the humor. And then everybody else, Anthony Hopkins is amazing per usual. And I thought Idris Elba was great as well, even though his character is not asked to do much. But with that being said, and without spoiling too much, most characters from the past Thor movies are not in this movie very long. So to me, he should just be thanking his lucky stars that he has a part in this movie, because they were kind of, wiping the slate clean, from the past Thor movies. But as we get into the newer people to this universe, I thought that all of them, for the most part, really shined. Cate Blanchett's an amazing actress, and I think that she played a great villain. I think that she does a great job here as Hela, and I'm excited to see the impact her character has on the Marvel Cinematic Universe going forward. The one person that I would complain about is Tessa Thompson. I don't think that she was bad as Valkyrie, but I think that she was just outshined a little bit whenever she was standing next to Mark Ruffalo and Chris Hemsworth. I think she's serviceable, but just not extraordinary. And then the last newcomer that I want to highlight is Jeff Goldblum, who, it's Jeff Goldblum. He's going to blow it out of the water no matter what he's doing, but he was especially great here. I thought that he was awesome as the Grandmaster, and I would watch a Grandmaster movie just to get Jeff Goldblum flex his acting chops and the humor that he brings to it in a full feature film. Just amazing job by him. So for me, I didn't have too much to complain about except for Tessa Thompson.
So yeah, we're definitely gonna disagree a little bit here. Usually it's the story that I have the most problems with, but honestly, with this film, I was kind of let down by some of the performances. I think that Tom Hiddleston's Loki is one of the few redeeming qualities of the Dark World. I think that he obviously shines in the Avengers as well as the kind of the big bad in that film. And so I was expecting him to just blow me away again. And he just, I don't know. I was underwhelmed by his performance. He didn't do anything bad. He wasn't like, oh my God, that was overacting or whatever. Like, it was nothing like that. It just, I expect a little bit more from him with that character. And I just didn't get it in this particular performance. And so I was a little bit disappointed in that. And I kind of feel the same way about Mark Ruffalo. He's a good actor who's done good work with the character in the past. And I kind of understand what he was going for, especially when he first becomes Bruce Banner and when he comes away from the Hulk and he becomes Bruce Banner. I get that he's trying to be a little shell-shocked and disoriented, but for me, it came off as a little bit over the top. And so I don't know. I just expect a little bit more from him and Tom Hiddleston, and I was underwhelmed by both of them. Cate Blanchett was the glaring weakness, I think, in this movie. I think that her performance was really one note. We've seen this same character done in a million other movies. The witch, like an evil witch type of character. I feel like that's the performance that we got from her. It was a really bland performance. Now, I don't think she was necessarily asked to do a whole lot, especially in some of the action scenes were a little underwhelming with her. But I just expect so much from her, and maybe that was my problem, was I expected her to just completely blow me away, and she just didn't do that. So I was a little bit disappointed with that. The one really, really good note that I really loved, and you touched on it a little bit in this film as far as performances are concerned, is Chris Hemsworth. We talked a lot about characters or actors playing characters for a really long time and kind of nailing them, and it's kind of hard for us to talk about performances when we're reviewing a show like Game of Thrones, and a lot of these actors have been playing these characters for years and have them nailed down. But I think he did something that we rarely ever see with an actor who's played, I think this is his fifth film playing this character, unless I'm forgetting one, because this is the third Thor film, and then you have the two Avengers films. I don't think he was in any other one. So he's played the character for 5 films, and he's brought in a new dynamic to the character, and he definitely has comedic chops. And I think that he played the character spot on, and I was just really blown away by the fact that he could bring a new dynamic to a character that he's played for so long. So he was definitely the best performance in this movie for me.
Cool. You ready to move on to action?
Sure. What'd you think of the action in Thor Ragnarok?
I thought that the action was pretty good. I enjoyed seeing Waititi get to flex a different muscle from what we're used to with him in those scenes, because obviously his specialty is comedy. So I think the action at the best was whenever there was humor involved. But like I mentioned in the story, I think that I was really hoping for something different in the third act, since this movie seemed to hit the reset button with Thor and this universe and these characters. I didn't want it to be just a big punch fest in the third act. So that was disappointing, even though I think that it was shot well, that was the climax of the movie. But overall, I think that what we get in this movie is some pretty cool action scenes, especially enjoyable whenever there's humor involved.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the review. I think of Thor kind of in the same way that I think of Superman, and that's why I never really like the Superman movies that much, because they kind of just turn into destruction porn. And I feel like the same way with Thor, because he's so powerful, he just punches people through walls, and he's never really in danger. And so I was a little bit underwhelmed with some of the action scenes, especially with Cate Blanchett's character, because just her throwing pointy sticks at people, it didn't do it for me. I just thought that was underwhelming. I wish that they had done more with the giant wolf. I thought that was pretty cool, and you never really get to see a ton of that. There is a Hulk v Wolf scene at the end that I thought was pretty badass, but it's underused, and so I was a little disappointed in that. But because they blended the humor and the action together so well, I think that definitely worked. It gave you a fresh take with the Thor universe, especially that first scene where he's battling that monster goat looking thing. And then the way they end that action sequence is really, really funny. And it sets the tone for the rest of the movie. And so I definitely appreciate what you said about them kind of blending the humor and the action together. And then of course the Planet Hulk stuff, the Thor v Hulk stuff definitely didn't disappoint.
Awesome, man. So what would you give this film out of 5 stars?
So I kind of want to go back and forth between 4.5 and 4, but ultimately because I'm not a huge fan of the character and the mythology really slowed this film down, I'm going to stick with 4.
And that is what I'm going to give it as well. I never even really honestly flirted with 4.5 just because some of the tropes turned me off to giving it a 4.5. And overall, I think it's a great movie, but it doesn't necessarily reinvent anything in the superhero genre, but it does do a good job of reinventing Thor and the characters associated with this franchise.
For sure. Do you want to put a cherry on top of this episode with Nerd Favorite?
Yeah. So sticking with our Thor theme, I want to know who your favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe supporting character is. And I'm not going to get too technical here. Whatever you define as a supporting character works for me. But my answer is a new character that was introduced in Thor Ragnarok that I purposefully did not talk about in our review because I wanted to talk about this character here. And that is the character of Korg that is voiced by Taika Waititi. And I think that my favorite parts of this film involved Korg, the rock monster from the Grandmaster's Gladiator fights. So it's hilarious to me, everything about this character. Obviously, he's a big rock-shaped character that has this high-pitched New Zealand accent, again provided by the director Taika Waititi. But I would seriously watch a Korg movie because every time he spoke or did anything in this movie, it made me smile or it made me laugh. And I thought that it was completely on point. And I know that this is probably just like a gut reaction saying he's my favorite supporting character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but I really, really did enjoy everything he had to do in this movie. And it left me wanting more of that character whenever the credits rolled.
For sure. He would probably be my pick as well, just because he was just so damn charming and he definitely brought the comedy in that film. There was certain parts that I was just like, every time he talked, I just expected a joke and he never disappointed. Like, it was genuinely funny every single time. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of that was improv because I know that a lot of the movies and stuff that they do with Flight of the Conchords and What We Do in the Shadows and stuff like that, a lot of that was improv. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of his stuff was improv. But you kind of put me in a weird position because that would probably be my answer as well. I want to go Yondu, but I feel like he's, especially in the second one, he's not really a supporting character at that point. He's kind of part of the Guardians of the Galaxy. So I'm going to pick Sean Gunn's character in Guardians of the Galaxy, especially in the second movie. I think that his arc is really, really great. And so he doesn't really bring a ton of comedy in that movie. I think his arc is a little bit more deep with Yondu and kind of seeing him as a father figure. I definitely appreciate all of that. So kind of, if you're putting me on the spot, that's who I'm going to go with.
Awesome, man. Good deal.
All right. So that's it for episode 163 of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. As always, we'd appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're on it. You can check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram. It's at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can also email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And then, of course, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt,
We are the nerds you're looking for. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.